Good morning. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email. My guests, plural, today, two gents heavily involved in the KumoMTA project, Tom Mairs and Mike Hillyer. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And we say MTA, and 99% of the world hears like the adults in Charlie Brown. What's an MTA, Tom?
Yeah, it's funny if you do a search for it. Most of the time, you'll find out, Metro Transit System or something like, it makes SEO very difficult.
Yeah.
But it's an MTA is an on-premise mail transfer agent. Takes mail from one place and sends it to another. And in our case, it takes it from one or two places and send it to billions of other places.
And why on-premise in your qualification?
Good question. There are really two different ways to get mail from its source to inboxes. One is to use an on-premise MTA, which is a physical or a cloud-based server that you own. You download the instant software, you install it, and you manage it.
Yeah.
The other way is to do it with a cloud service where somebody else has done that and you're just using their service. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So an MTA is still an MTA, whether you're using it in a cloud or in your own system.
Okay.
But an MTA takes it from one place to another. We specialize in that on-premise, you own it software, you own it, you deploy it, you manage it, and you're responsible for it.
Oh, okay. And Kumo specifically, open source.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I said, was one of the things that really caught my attention. Now, just for background, both of you guys have like terrifically long history in the email space. Acquired by MessageBird in your case, Tom?
Yeah, actually, I've been working in that space I had been working in that space for about 15, 16 years.
Well,
Mike actually pulled me into that world I was a self-employed consultant for a very long time doing exchange and send mail type implementations for companies with the inbound. Working on the outbound was a new experience 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But,
and then Mike,
all Mike's fault.
Socket Labs and what else?
So I go way back. So I actually started out in open source. So
Did you? Okay.
Actually, first job I ever had out of school beyond the one that I met. So I met Tom at a previous job, and then I went off to work in open source. So I worked for MySQL, which is an open source database company.
Sure.
That one eventually got acquired by Sun, who got acquired by Oracle.
Cool. Yeah.
Just before it got acquired by Sun, I was recruited over to what at the time was Message Systems, because Message Systems, the founders were very active in open source. And I met them because we were both speaking at open source conferences at OSCON and some other events. And in meeting with them, they said, hey, you're really good at explaining things in your conference sessions. Could you come and do that for our other customers, right? For people who are trying to use the software for email. And I was able to say, sure, let's give that a go. And so I started off in email in 2006, working for Message Systems. That eventually became SparkPost. That eventually got acquired by MessageBird.
Right.
Although I actually left before the MessageBird acquisition. I always leave just before the big acquisition. That's my system.
So you think I wasn't paying attention, but I'm going to hook back and say, did you ever end up getting calls from lawyers when there was the whole Oracle Sun, what's going to happen?
No, I was asked at that point. So like I said, I left MySQL just before they got acquired by Sun. And then I left MessageBird I left SparkPost just before they got acquired by MessageBird. So I like to just get out before the acquisitions. But with that, then I was there till 2018, went off and started a consulting company called Email Ninjas, worked with Socket Labs for a bit. And one of the things I saw, especially in the last couple of years, as I would talk to different ESPs, I've worked with most of them at this point, just because a lot of them use Message Systems, SparkPost infrastructure.
Sure.
And as I would talk to them about, what they were looking at in the future with on-prem, the one answer I kept getting back was, we're kind of tired of the vendor relationship. And with that, a lot of them were building their own MTA. They were like, you know what, we're going to make our own going forward, which is a very ambitious goal.
That's a very ambitious goal.
I've seen multiple companies do it. But that became very clear to me that they were looking for something other than the commercially licensed MTA with its changes in fees and terms and everything else. And the reality is that I mean, this is the future of email, but the history of email is actually open source. Most
I was
large
took the words out of my
senders,
mouth. Yeah,
they
absolutely.
started out in postfix. They started out using SendMail, something along those lines. And then
Yeah.
eventually, when their volumes got high, that's when they moved to the original open source or the original commercial options, which was back in the day, there was Ironport. Then there was Message Systems Momentum. There was Port 25's Power MTA. They went to those options because open source was never built for sending at scale. It was built for smaller senders. And you'd go into some of these companies and they'd have like, I'd go into a place that had like a whole rack of postfix servers running.
Yeah.
And they had ingenious little scripts that would say, hey, postfix can only send for one user at a time. So we're going to spin this one up as customer 5, send their campaign, spin it down, turn it into customer 13, send customer 13, right? Like they do all of that because they didn't have the multi-tenant, the high volume, whatever. We went into that place for a place with 2 servers of Momentum back in the day, right? Like from a whole rack to 2 machines because open source wasn't doing what they needed. So that's where my history has been, is first of all, working in open source and databases, then replacing a ton of it in email, and now hopefully bringing open source back to large scale senders.
Would I be describing the challenge that MTA has to tackle at scale somewhat accurately if I said, look, when you start going to millions of messages, billions of messages in some case, out the door, this sort of completely unpredictable handshake, hi, I've got this for you, got this for you. It's just a different engineering problem than sending one email message, right? And all of the monitoring, maintenance, performance, to make all of that work. That's a non-trivial task. That's why my eyebrows went up when you said right there on MTA, like, whoa, not easy. What am I missing in that equation?
It is a very complicated situation. The understanding how email works it takes a little bit. Doing a single message, you can follow that conversation. When you start sending hundreds of thousands of messages, that's also relatively easy to juggle. When you get into the millions of messages or billions, there are people out there sending billions of messages every single day.
Sure.
You're starting to bend the laws of physics. So you have to get really crafty about how you manage things like garbage collection and caches, and that stuff becomes really, really important when you're going that fast.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see people. I'm just going to build my own MTA. Well, yeah, you understand the concepts, but you don't really understand what happens when you send it at light speed. When you start going really, really, really fast, really strange things happen. So you have to look at things like, can you parallelize those things? Can you make things happen in a different concept? Not just having, one of the big major downfalls of some of those other systems is a single queue. So for instance, postfix, you've got a single queue, you can put mail into it, and you have to wait for that mail to go before you can send the next set of mail.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've done is we've spanned that all out. So you don't just have one queue. A single campaign might end up having 50 or 100 or 1,000 parallel queues that all split out the mail in a big fan, which is an interesting trick, but that actually adds more complication to the engineering part of it.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to spin up a metaphor. Maybe it'll be useful in this conversation. Maybe not, because I think we're going to get technical, but I'm going to build my own MTA, and I'm not knocking someone who wants to tackle that, but that's like, I'm going to build a jalopy out in my garage. You guys are dealing with traffic engineering for the interstate system, which is a different problem than the car. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the, and it's interesting because this is not the first modern architecture open source MTA that's being developed. There's actually 5 or 6 really popular ones right now, but most of those projects, and including actually a lot of MTAs that are built in general, they usually start out as a receiving tool. And so when you do receiving and you think about it, if I'm a receiving MTA, what I need to be able to do is accept a lot of connections from a lot of different places and be able to make decisions based on each connection, each message. Did this come from a trusted IP range? Does this message trigger any filters? All of that has to happen in parallel as far as the receiving side goes. And then once they're vetted and they're let in, they are put into a single queue because most MTAs, especially receiving side, just drop that message then into the mail server for IMAP, for whatever you use, Exchange, whatever that may be, where it then gets, looked at by the end user. And I know that machine, outside of it failing, will accept every message I hand it as quick as I can hand it to it, right?
Okay.
So I don't need a queue to pass onward, because my one queue is just there in case that machine goes down. And if it's down, then I'm not trying anything. And as soon as it's back up again, I just dump it all into the IMAP box, right into the mailbox server.
Yeah.
That's it. That's a sending MTA. That's why, even though there's been several popular open source MTA projects, they're still not seeing any use by email service providers or large senders, because that's not the problem they're trying to solve. When it comes to queue management, it really is the make or break of a high volume service, for sending. And you think about it like an airport, right? If you had an airport, if you were running, I live in Atlanta, if you were running Hartsfield and it had one X-ray machine, one queue to stand in order to get your mail checked, it would be a nightmare. It's already not exactly great getting in line for security at Hartsfield as it is. But what if there was only one X-ray machine, right?
Yeah.
What we have instead is the ability to say, we don't just have a line, and it's like airlines. We don't just have a Delta line. We don't just have a line specifically for, whether it's going to this place or that place. We have the equivalent of saying, we actually have, for every airline, for every city they go to, we have a separate security line. So if you're on Delta to Atlanta, you're in Atlanta. If you're on Delta to Orlando, that's one security line. If you're on Delta to New York, that's a different security line. If you're on American Airlines to Orlando, that's a separate security line. And that means that no two passengers going to Orlando through those two airlines are standing in the same line. If American Airlines slows down, the Delta passengers can still get through the line to Orlando. If Delta slowed down to New York, that doesn't affect Delta to Orlando, right? That kind of queue management is what makes a solution like this effective at extreme scale, is because we never queue two messages to the same destination from the same channel into the same queue. So slowdowns never become a problem as far as that goes.
So you, unlike a receiving MTA, if I'm understanding what you just explained correctly, you've sort of got a multiplex queue problem, right? Queues in as well as queues out that you've figured out how to manage. Wow. That's hardcore.
Queues in isn't actually the thing. Queues in is actually about being able to do a large number of parallel connections across a large number of threads, all running on separate schedulers.
Yeah.
That's what a good receiving MTA needs, is very multi-threaded connection handling on the inbound. Mm-hmm. And then an outgoing MTA still needs that because there's a lot to manage, but it's the queues that make it on the outbound. So a good sending server has to be capable of both.
Right. Okay. That makes sense, even though it'd be very hard to draw on screen. Slightly different question, but entirely related. How did Kumo come together first? Like, you've got multiple people with a heck of a lot of experience involved. This didn't just happen over, one frosty malt beverage. How did this start coming together?
Oh, this is the virtual age. It happened over no beverages at all. It was all online. So this comes back. Actually, it's one of those things where, because of what the industry looked like last year, and especially what happened in the industry. So I started out, first of all, I've worked with the two co-founders. So like Tom said, I brought him in at Message Systems because I wanted an additional person to help me out. And I knew Tom was the guy. And then Wes, our engineering co-founder, was the chief architect of the Momentum MTA product at Message Systems when I joined. So I knew Wes from the very start of my career. And then I think it was 2 years later, I brought Tom in, and then Tom knew Wes as well. So that's where we all knew each other from. And here's the thing, when you start something when you're older, you get an advantage that, you hear all these stories about startups and they're all 20 something and they've got incredible creativity and energy and they come up with things that you just would never have imagined. But when you start something up in your middle age, you're on easy mode. You get certain cheat codes. And one of them is, I don't have to, you'll see all these things on LinkedIn, how to find a good co-founder. You need this and this and this and a good co-founder. And you better get it right early on because have these agreements in place. Or you wait till you're 45 and all the best people and you just go straight to the best people because they're also your friends. Right. And so that was essentially how that all came about.
Cool.
And Wes had gone from message systems to Facebook, where he built some of the extreme scalability components over there for various things that they work on. And he was getting to the point where he's like, all right, I've done my Facebook time. I want to try something different. And I knew that because I talked to him. And I'm like, why not try this? And then Tom, I was like, we need the perfect customer success person. They need to understand how to explain all this to customers, keep them all happy, keep them all taken care of. That's what Tom's been doing for years at SparkPost, then MessageBird. And so, yeah, you bring together three people who all know each other well and all have their own piece of the pie that they contribute. And like I said, it's almost like cheating because we just didn't have to do this whole search of co-founders and everything else.
Well, if I had a frosty malt beverage, I would raise it and toast you because I couldn't agree more about the sort of cheat codes of having some experience when you start a new thing, experience in relationships when you start a new thing. Like it really is a different ballgame. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it is a different ballgame.
It was kind of an interesting perfect storm, where the three of us had worked together. We know each other quite well. We worked very well together when we worked together. And then we all found ourselves, temporarily unemployed, and literally just ended up having a conversation over a frosty beverage. And the idea just kind of percolated as part of a side conversation. How would you do things differently if you could do it again? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, I thought we were just having a really interesting conversation as old friends that had the time to talk. Never really thought about it at the beginning, turning into a business. And then things just kind of percolated, and it's like, hey, this is actually a really cool thing. This could actually go somewhere. And that organically grew with three people that are. I couldn't think of a better way to have three co-founders come together as people that already knew each other and had a common goal and common philosophy to start with.
And probably a lot of commonality in the map of relationships and knowledge, since you all three worked in a lot of overlapping industries and worked together in overlapping industries. And we could go on and on about how the email space is kind of particularly interesting and connected, but if we get there, tell me about the decision to make this an open source project. Mike, you said you spent a bunch of time in open source, but that didn't mean you had to go there with this.
It more meant that I knew the answer to the problem that I actually encountered. So, I've always been what I like to call Mr. On-Prem. So I've always done on-prem email, and on-prem can mean server in a colo. It can mean I have a server in AWS. It means I'm not using SaaS, right? And as I would, stay in the industry and talk to people, I talked to a couple of CEOs at some of the larger ESPs, and I'm like, are you interested in looking at another vendor MTA to work with? And the answer was, we don't want to start another relationship like that. Like, some of these companies have been very long-term with a commercial vendor, and they've seen, changes from a perpetual license to a volume-based license to a tier-based license, annual license. All these things keep happening. And they're like, we don't want to start over with that. We don't want to go to another vendor, start another relationship where everything seems great, but then lo and behold, over time, the terms change, and they wind up feeling held hostage, because if they stop paying the annual fees that they're obligated to, well, then the servers just shut off, right? And they said, so we, half of them would say, like, we're going to stick to the devil we know, because even though we've had all these changes, and what's the old Star Wars quote? I've changed the agreement, pray I don't change it further, kind of thing, right? They're like, yeah, but we can't stop paying or our servers turn off, and we don't want to start the cycle somewhere else. So this is the devil we know. We're going to stick with it. Okay. Plus, changing out an MTA is a huge undertaking. And then some of them would say, well, we're going to build our own, right? Which is also a huge undertaking. Yeah. But they, at least at the end of that undertaking, theoretically own an MTA that will never have their license terms changed underneath them, will never, be subject to, all they have to do is maintain a team that knows the product. There's risks there. Stuff tends to, for a large ESP, my customer facing stuff is what's important. My stuff under the hood will only get updated after that if there's something critical. And so those teams tend to get reassigned to do other stuff. And it kind of goes into not shelfware, but it doesn't get iterated on. Like, it happens all the time. Like, there's orgs I've seen that, say, hey, we're going to build our own WYSIWYG editor for our emails. Others say we're going to use B-Free, right? Or B.io. And the ones that use B have an org that is constantly improving that WYSIWYG editor.
Yeah.
The ones that don't have to have a lot more diligence to make sure they keep improving, because it's really tempting to say, and it's working, and let's work on something else, right?
Yeah.
So that's the risk of the ones that try to build their own, assuming they have the skill set to do it in the first place. So with all that, though, what I understood was, having come from open source, like at MySQL, it is a commercial open source company. The whole idea of that organization is we're creating an open source MTA, and we know that people are going to use it. It got paired up with PHP, became the most popular database for quite a while there.
Sure.
And they knew that certain CTOs would show up and go, hey, what happens if that breaks? Well, we go to the forum, we go to the chat, we try to figure out an answer. He's like, that's not going to work. We need to know that there's a throat to choke. We need to know there's someone we can phone. And that's how MySQL got its business, was selling support to companies that want to use it, but need to have the insurance of, I can phone support and have this problem fixed. And so I knew that model was exactly what I was hearing from these CEOs of these ESPs. Was they weren't saying it because they weren't thinking of that, right? But they were saying essentially, I want an infrastructure that I'm not held hostage by. I want to know that I can use it, that if I don't like the license terms, that I can stop paying, and that it's going to keep running, that I'm never held captive by that vendor. And that's what open source as a company allows us to do, is to say, here it is, here's the source code. If anything goes wrong, if we're all hit by buses, there it is. You can continue moving forward with it. If you decide you don't want to pay us support, you never have to start. If you and we have to earn your business every year. If you don't like what we're doing for you, there's nothing keeping you from stopping paying for support, because all you lose out on is the ability to contact us for support. The software is going to keep right on working, right? And the best part is, like, Tom, I think, was around even in the early days when this was the case. But when we were selling, commercial MTA message systems, and it was a smaller company, we'd get clients who would say, I'm going to need code escrow. Because the whole idea was, you're a little company, you may make it, I hope you do, you may not. And I need to know that if you fail, that I don't lose use of this software. And so there was escrow agreements in most of those early customer contracts to say, we keep pushing the code to a third-party organization. If we ever go under, that code gets released to those customers. Yeah. We just skip the middleman and just release it immediately, which not only means nobody's worried about the risk of us going under, that they won't have access to the code, but it also is very transparent for security. If you're worried about how this is implemented, if you're worried that there might be things, take our public code and get somebody to do an audit of it. Feel free, it's there. It's wide open for you.
Would it be a fair broad strokes statement to say that adopting an open source model like what you've described, Kumo, MySQL, whatever, requires enough expertise on the customer side, the one who's not paying for licensing, maybe paying for a throat to choke. They've got to, you said, read the code. They got to know how to do that to get the benefit out of that, don't they?
That raises the other thing I was thinking about while Mike was talking about this. From a customer success point of view, it lends to this very, very nicely. I've been running customer success and solutions engineering teams for a very long time. And one of the things that always gets in the way, more so in the last 3 to 4 years, has been the licensing conversation. A customer success person is just trying to help the customer be successful. And the licensing things. Well, my license comes up, or after we deal with the renewal, or, make sure that you pay your bill so that we can actually help you out more. I just want to help you. I want to help you be successful. I want to build a solution and help you get your messages out and not have that problem. But I've got this licensing thing in the way I have to worry about. From a customer success point of view, not having any licensing to worry about is a gold mine, because now I can actually just help the customer. And now it's a conversation about support as opposed to licensing a piece of software. So now one of the things that we have been doing with the current customers is helping them actually get deployments, actually building implementations for them, and wrapping support and professional services around that. That's really our whole model. You can have the software for free, and you have access to the code anytime you want. But if you really want to be successful, you'd be crazy to do that without a support agreement or somebody to reach out to for help. It's not just about having a throat to choke. Oh, that's a really important piece at 2 o'clock in the morning when everything breaks.
Yeah.
But when you've got a new idea and you just want to bounce something off, I have a piece of code that I just want to test. If you're paying for licensing, there's always that nagging feeling that, oh, they're going to increase my fees, or they're going to charge me extra for this. When it's all wrapped into a support agreement, it allows their solutions and customer success people to just help the customer.
Yeah. 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 And I'm a huge fan of open source. I think it's one of the most intellectually, and I don't mean this word the way I'm going to say it, politically, eco-politically significant things in the last 30 years. Like, it's astonishing what it's enabled, but it's not
I agree with
necessarily,
you.
it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. And with the skill set that
No.
you guys pulled together at the table that became Kumo, saying, let's go that direction. I don't know if you'd done it, if you hadn't had experience doing it in the past.
So one of the interesting things to me, and something to keep in mind with this, is that our initial target customer is literally an email service provider, an organization where there are people dedicated to mail ops, to running the servers, keeping them configured. Often there's an overlap of deliverability. Sometimes there's not. Some of these large ESPs have a deliverability team and a mail ops team.
Yeah.
And mail ops is about keeping the servers going. Deliverability is about tuning and everything else. But one of the things that we didn't expect early on, first of all, you have to have a unicorn developer. Wes is absolutely incredible. Like I said, he's built some of the key components to keep Facebook fast and running, right? And so now, and this is the third time he's built an MTA actually. So it's not even like that's new to him.
Yeah.
And because of that, one of my initial expectations was that, yes, it's open source, but I was like, but we're doing this as a company and we're not expecting initial contributions. Like, this isn't yet a community project. This is a commercial product that is open source.
Yes.
The unexpected surprise for me, the pleasant surprise, was we've already had of our customers and the evaluators, we've already had 4 outside individuals who have contributed code. So as an example, we had somebody who's working on our software, who was testing out, and they're like, our initial implementation of DKIM signing didn't expose settings for what's called canonicalization for headers and for the body of the message. We figured, most people are just going to want to use the standard relaxed. So we're just going to deploy that for now. Next thing you know, we get a pull request into our repo saying, here's a block of code. I want to be able to do header and body canonicalization differently than what the default is.
Yeah.
And they wrote code. They wrote the modifications to our code to make that available to them in their config, and then submitted it to us. And Wes gives it a little feedback. We do a couple of tweaks, in it goes. So that's the other amazing thing is, like, with open source, and especially in this case, rather than saying, hey, I need this, when can it be on the roadmap? Especially if it's a little change like that actually was.
Yeah.
I don't have to say, hey, I need this, when's it going to be on the roadmap? This person modified their copy to do it, and then sent us the code modification so that we could, at our choice, incorporate it into the official mainline release, which we did.
Yeah.
And so they got what they needed immediately, and then we were able to take that contribution and make it better for everyone as a result. Yeah. So that's the other beauty of it, is that people don't have to be like, hey, I really need this, when can it be on the roadmap? If they want to, they can actually, we're always happy to do, we're happy to do paid mods. Again, we're not charging licenses, so we make our money where we can, which is professional services.
Sure.
But they don't have to wait for us. They can, make that contribution themselves, keep it for themselves if they want to, or push it back to us to incorporate into the larger release.
Wow, that's terrific. Do you mind if I asked what the sort of stack underneath is, language, data storage, and so on? Like, because writing it, especially for the third time, you've got a unicorn developer going, I'm going to use this to tackle this big problem. Like, what are the key pieces?
It's all Rust and Lua. So
Interesting.
Rust is it's like a better version of C. Like, it's what it should have been. It's incredibly fast. It's very malleable if you know how to deal with it. It manages the hardware very, very, very well. And then on top of that, from a configuration point of view, we use Lua. Lua is it's unfortunately people don't know a whole lot about Lua, but it's a fantastic language. It reads almost like English. It's if you ever learned BASIC when you were in high school, it's so incredibly simple to write Lua, but it also has the power of directly working with at the sea level. So Lua and Rust work really, really well together. You never have to touch the Rust. It's the basic engine that goes very, 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 very fast.
Okay.
Lua allows you to do the configuration. And we intentionally didn't write a static config.
Yeah.
We did the whole thing in Lua. So you have total control over how you manage the message as it comes in, which adds some complication for us from a support point of view, because there isn't a standard config. The config is literally, I posted it earlier in a post on LinkedIn. The config is about 3 lines of Lua, start a listener and send the mail.
I'm not familiar with Lua, but am I understanding this accurately that it gives you a smart, when people ask for scriptability or a script, they say, I want to do programmatic stuff. It doesn't mean I want to undo the engine that's running it, but I want to get beyond, I've got to do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. You can do things like if then else conditions. You can loop it. You can do iterations. You can reach out to databases and pull things back in. So something I just published this morning is, the ability to say, okay, if this message has this username, go out to the database, pull this back, see whether or not it validates. Then if it's authenticated, then go ahead and send it. But before you do that, strip all these headers out because they don't want that going out to the public, and then sign it with Lua and do it in this order. All that millions of messages an hour. And you can do that. Lua allows you to expose just, 10 lines of instructions, if this, then that. And then you don't have to worry about the 1,000 lines of Rust underneath it that's actually doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. No wonder people are going to start and bang down the door already. The mod you talked about earlier, Mike, was that done in Lua?
So what happens, I will say one more nice thing about Rust is it's all memory safe out of the box. And it has so many built-in capabilities. Like, just as a quick little anecdote, with Momentum, which was message systems, it was C++ and it was Lua as a scripting language, but not a config language, just to draw a line there. So your configs were still text files. In the text file, you could say at this point in the flow, I want to call this Lua script and run it and then get back to it. But you couldn't configure it using Lua. But like one of the biggest changes that happened in Momentum during my tenure there was it was a scheduler based approach, which is, I'm not even going to deep explain it, but instead of having a thread for every connection, it has a thread that is constantly watching everything that goes on and acting on everything. And it uses extra threads to do like the slow work. When the number of cores, like when there was only 2 cores in a server, best ideal approach. As there were more and more cores in a server, it was not as ideal as multi-threaded. And so one of Wes's largest projects was changing that scheduler approach to be multi-threaded schedulers, where there's multiple schedulers watching different areas and reacting to all the different events. It made it incredibly scalable, over 10 million messages an hour in some circumstances per box. When he went to Rust, which he did back at, he did that back at Facebook. He became a big Rust advocate partway through. And he was teaching people how to use Rust, and they were migrating a lot of what they did to Rust over at Facebook. But when he comes here to do that MTA, to do KumoMTA, multi-threaded scheduling is just a crate. It's an already existing feature, and he just plugged it in. And DKIM signing was a feature, and he plugged it in. It wasn't complete. He did submit some contributions back to that project, but a lot of what he did was just grabbing these crates that are already pre-built and gluing them together with code. So instead of building it all from the ground up, I mean, there's a reason why we've only been at it since February and we're pretty much code complete, is because Rust adds all these capabilities that used to be hand coded in C. So with Lua though, I mean, the benefit is the heavy lifting's in Rust, the telling it what to do and how to do it is in Lua. And when somebody wants an integration, like for example, saying, hey, I want to validate, like Tom said, I want to validate auth off of a data source like SQLite. Normally that's a config file and then call Lua here and then do Lua. Our config file is a script. So if somebody says, hey, like normally most of these ESPs, they're using PowerMTA, they're using Momentum, what have you, text config files, and they write little scripts that that take a data source with their DKIM signing and they write a file in the format and they place it in the right place and they tell the server to reload the file and the server reloads the file. And now I know the newest rules for signing DKIM. With us, we write a Lua script that says, when it comes time to do a DKIM signature, this is where it is in SQLite. Go ask it and then do the signature. And that's it. There's no static text file that needs to be updated.
Yeah.
It just asks the server, right? And so with Momentum and even PowerMTA, one of our challenges used to be, well, I've got to allocate enough memory space because I've got to take, let's say I've got 4,000 IPs I'm signing for and 5,000 customers for DKIM and all these different throttles.
Yeah.
There were customers so big, we had to increase the memory limits of the config store in memory to fit it all.
Yes.
These files would get to be hundreds of megs even. With this approach, we don't store the config in memory. We're actually saying at the moment you need to know what DKIM signature to use, go ask.
I'll run your Lua script
for a minute in case you're signing a lot in Lua, right?
Yeah.
And then go cache that information in case we need to do that signature 1,000 times or whatever, because it's a big campaign.
Yeah.
And then forget about it until the next time you need to know that scenario. Right? What IP should I use? Most of the time you predefine all the IPs. You have to schedule the reloads because you got to bounce the server to reload all the data. Here we're saying, hey, if a tenant comes in that you haven't seen before, ask the data source and then cache that info. And what IP does it go out of? Ask the data source, which could be a file. It could be a text file on the disk. You don't have to stop using text files, but now the text file isn't a config file. It's a data source that's being queried.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's now you're handling it with
database.
You're handling
so
your
even
instructions.
Yeah. And so now everything is just loaded as it's needed. We don't have a server. We don't have a config reload command because we're constantly reading what we need to know when we need to know it.
Yeah. Yeah. I got you. 5-minute hookback question for my 2 minutes of looking at Rust. Crate is sort of the equivalent of library in Rust land.
Effectively, yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought. Wow. That's a powerful combo.
Mike actually hit on something that's actually a fairly major problem, a hidden underlying problem in this industry for mail ops people that isn't really well known, I don't think. In that all of the major MTAs have to do this reload, and reloads are a pain.
Yeah.
So you make a configuration, marketing wants something slightly different, or you've got a new key that you have to add. Yeah. You have to make that change in your config, and then you have to reload the server.
Yeah, which means empty the queue, right?
Well, not only that, but what if you have 40 servers,
right,
and 3 different data centers,
right?
Well, it's an engineering problem in itself.
Yes,
just reloading all of that.
Yes.
KumoMTA is cluster aware, and you can actually have centralized management, and you don't have to do any of those reloads because it's just reading data when it's needed. So all you have to do is update the backend data and keep on going. There's no reloads. There's no waiting. There's no requeuing. There's no dumping stuff back out into the wild and having possible deliverability issues because you've pushed all that queue back out again when you didn't want to.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for those. You don't have to wait for a whole bunch of maintenance windows to make changes to your config. It just makes life so much easier from a management point of view for a mail ops engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. And much more DevOps way of running the MTA as opposed to stop, wait, reboot, new config.
Exactly.
Not make a typo in the config file, right?
Right.
And honestly, that DevOps mail up approach is also core to what we're doing. Like Kumo is, by the way, Japanese for the word cloud. So we, right from the beginning, wanted to know that this was going to be cloud friendly because everybody wants to move to their own cloud, right? Like they want to use, they don't necessarily want a cloud, like as in a third-party SaaS vendor that does their email relay, but they want their servers in their own cloud. And sometimes they want to take some of their traffic and send it off through somebody else's cloud service. And we support that. But from the mail ops perspective, like historically, the MTA has been a black box, right? It's you set it up, put the config file in, you inject the message in over SMTP, maybe it's got an API or something. And then you've got a log file that you read for what happens on the other side. And it's never been an integrated element of an environment. Even when you integrate, well, how do we integrate it? Well, you're going to write these include files to this location from whatever data source you have using a Perl script, and then tell the server to reload it. And then here's how you read the logs. And if you want to get to close real time, you read them on a regular basis. And there's been advances in some of the commercial tools, especially since I left, because I wrote some of that roadmap before I left, never saw it see fruition. But that's not how it works anymore. People want APIs to talk to servers. They don't want to sit there in command lines. We used to set up for people where we'd have cron jobs run a command line that would then do something to the server on a regular basis, or we'd have a little script that would catch a hook and use it to issue a command line and send it back as a response, like all that. So they are getting better at implementing management APIs and injection APIs. But the modern thing is, well, we don't want, logs anymore. I need a webhook. I need to get this data back in real time to the rest of my environment. So now we're looking and saying, okay, and this again, we also cheated in the sense of we didn't have to have a product team go out and do a whole bunch of research because we've been doing this for so long that we know what we would do better the next time. Yeah. And so it's like this time right out of the gate, it's got to have webhooks. It's got to, push data out over AMQP. It's got to take injection over an API. It's got to be managed over an API, right? Like we have a command line thing. All it does is call the API. It doesn't do anything directly. It's just there to call the API on your behalf. Yeah. Like we knew that this time around, it had to be an integrated part of an environment, not a black box that you talk to in a specific way. So that's why, Lua lets it reach, it can take its config from any data source and just use it directly. It can take API. I think we're putting Kafka for sending out log entries next because somebody asked for that. Yeah. But AMQP was a big one. They want that real time data coming out of the server and to as many different destinations. We had one thing we didn't expect this early on is we knew people would want webhooks, and somebody's like, I need a webhook for each tenant. So I need each tenant to get a webhook with their information to their webhook endpoint. And we're like, oh yeah, I can see why you'd want that. Yeah. And then we did it in Lua. We didn't modify the Rust code because the Lua was capable of doing that. Right. Yes. So it's like, all right, well, here's a Lua script that's going to do that. That's the beauty of config as code is, Tom and I used to love Momentum because it's like, we didn't have to know the use cases in advance to make them happen. Mm-hmm. And even then we were writing config files and then bits of Lua. Here we're like, we really don't need to know the use cases in advance for most things because it's all Lua scripting on top of that Rust. So it's fast and it's flexible at the same time. Because you can never predict what somebody's going to do when you hand them a toolbox.
Right. No, this is actually a fascinating conversation on a bunch of levels. I did want to ask you about something. You just gave me the opening to ask about it. Kumo, Japanese for cloud, and you were planning from the get-go for, cloud implementations, whatever that means. You look at the decision that I think it was Elastic DB made a year and a half back about changing terms because basically they felt like AWS was taking them for a ride. Did you guys have conversations about that, and have you grappled with it?
Yeah.
We've had licensing conversations for sure. So one of the things, this actually ties into another area. There's been multiple examples over time of companies that started out with open source and then changed their license. Mostly they change it to be like, all right, well, if you compete with us, you can't use the open source, or if you host it or what have you, because of that. But if you look deeper, what you almost always see under the hood of all of those companies that make those decisions is investors. There's VC money, there's ROI. Like one of the things that we wanted to get away from is ROI. We wanted to get away from this idea. Well, not ROI. We want ROI, but hockey sticks, right? Every time I've worked for a company that has VC money or has backing by investors, everybody keeps saying hockey stick, hockey stick, hockey stick. Tom and I agreed early on, the only time we want to ever say hockey stick, how the Calgary Flames are doing, and whether or not Atlanta's going to get a team for a third time so I can watch in person again. That's it. Unless we're talking hockey, no hockey stick. But the idea is that these when you have that investor money, you have this pressure to you've got to increase revenue. You got to find new TAMs. So you wind up with products being introduced that don't necessarily benefit the customer, decisions being made that don't benefit the customer. And it all comes because there's this demand for that return from the investors. Yeah. We agreed and we are not taking investor money because we don't have an exit plan, right? We're not here to sell this to someone. We're not here to go public. This is a good little market to work in, but it's not big enough to be a public company in.
and getting acquired is never good for the customer in the long term, right? Then whoever acquires you is there to find a way to get more money out of it than you were getting out of it so that they can get that investment back. So most of those decisions that you see are based on that concept of we need to get a bigger return. The other thing is we're never going to have that Amazon concern because we also have no desire to be a cloud relay provider, right? Like we're not looking to, because then you have to have, well, first of all, you have to have investors to be successful because you got to market it like crazy. You got to have sales teams because you're going after individual, cloud users. And then you have to have compliance teams and deliverability teams because now you're hosting it. Now you're providing it. You got to manage all the IPs, all the servers, all of that. We're a software company. We're here to provide this out for people to use to build those things for themselves. And that's great. If they want to go and they want to, give send and run for their money with our software, by all means, go for it. But we're not here to build that kind of a business. And so we're not worried if Amazon were to take it and use it to run SES because we were never planning to introduce our own SES in the first place. Like you look at HashiCorp, right? Oh, Amazon's taking it and they're hosting it for us or for people. And now they're taking profits and we're now they're not using our hosted version because they're using Amazon's. Yeah, we're not doing it in the first place. So the only way to compete with us would be to build an MTA and try to sell support for it, right? And even if you took ours and tried to sell it, wouldn't like supporting it, right? Like nobody's going to go to you for support when they can go to us. So the thing that we do, we're not expecting anyone to compete with and using our code. So we just aren't worried about that particular scenario really because we don't have, we don't have investors saying find more revenue.
Yeah. My sense is that the clients of open source who build derived businesses by adding something to that mix, whether it's, cloud hosting or something like that, they seem to have learned the lesson that they've gotta in some way stay connected with the source of the source for everyone to stay healthy, viable, et cetera, in the long run. I mean, you look at the big cloud players, and I think Microsoft particularly has had a major heart transplant in this front. Like they're quite pro and quite supportive of open source, broadly speaking, because they can't afford not to be. P.S. They're all running on Linux boxes too, so right, it's got to work.
That's a relatively recent change in the life of Microsoft as well, and I think that is an indication that we're. I want to say we're at the beginning of a revolution, but I think we're kind of in the middle of it and it's been kind of quiet. There's a ton of companies out there running on open source and they don't even know it.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
How many Docker containers are out there and people think that they actually own that? It's like, no, you're actually running on open source right now.
Well, I mean, you've got audits to make sure you have some freaking idea whether or not you are. Right. What were you gonna say, Mike?
Oh, I was also going to say, like, support for us is a product, but support goes both ways. Like I've had people say, well, what if we only wind up they're like, well, we only call our current vendor like twice a year at most. What should we even be paying support? And the answer is, well, it's support in two ways, right? It's yes, you have our support to use the product, and yes, it's going to be very stable. So once it's up and configured and running, odds are you're not going to call us with a Sev 1 issue because it's just not going to break like that. But the other is to say, well, support also means you're supporting this team. Right. If you built your own MTA, you would pay salaries for people to constantly, first to build it and then to keep building because you would never run the risk of having an unmaintained app in the middle of, they're email service providers. The word is email. They are like, it's amazing how many people don't realize I'll walk into an office of a big ESP and I'll pass like 50 designers and then 30 copywriters and then, 20 marketers and a whole wing of salespeople going to the basement where there's two guys that are running all the MTAs and anyone else in this building can get sick. But if the servers go down, the whole business stops. Like half the graphic artists can be out if it's a full service shop or the support people can be gone and it's still not the end of the world. But there's only one or two guys at the bottom that are running the servers that actually make that whole business tick. And so part of it is that, they're going to support open source because the great thing is that our users want us to succeed, right? They want us to keep doing this and keep making it better and keep going. And so part of paying support is also just a commitment to say, our business depends on this thing. And that means we depend on these. I mean, yes, it's nice to know there's source code out there, but the reality is we need these guys to continue to do this thing and to build out more people to help us with it. And to make sure that that organization continues to do that indefinitely, which is our whole plan, because we depend on that piece of software more than anything else to keep our business going. Right? That's a big trust they put on us, but they also understand that for that to work, yes, they have the option to use it for free, and a lot of people do. But and some of them don't if a guy's running a website and he needs a mail server, the mail server isn't critical to his whole business. But if you're an email service provider, your whole organization counts on this. So what's throwing some support money at it? And we tell people, like, look, take what you pay for support now to your current vendor, and we'll take that. You don't need to spend new money. There's no new license fees. Just take your existing spend, move it over. And in return, this thing keeps going. And their software that they're going to be depending on continues to be evolved and improved, because this is all we do. We're not, even if you build it yourself, okay, how long can you keep your focus there before it's working good enough and you move those people to something else, keep one guy there just to keep an eye on it? Here, this is all we do. And so for that money, you get to keep three and eventually more people just doing this one thing.
Awesome. I'm keeping an eye on the clock on the top right here, and because I don't want to use up your time, we should probably think about wrapping. But I wanted to ask you what the state of the business of KumoMTA.com is. Are you guys happy with where you are? What are the immediate steps you want to see in terms of growth and reaching more customers? Like, how things looking?
Yeah, I have to tell you, you touched on this a little bit about the concepts of going into open source and selling all of that. I did have some fear and trepidation at the very beginning of this whole conversation, not this one, but the conversation about Kumo. And as we talk through it, the idea of trying to sell open source software grew on me, and I started thinking about all the amazing possibilities that were there. But I was thinking we would work on some foundation for a year, and maybe June or July in 2024, we'd be able to launch a product and be able to, get out into the community. And I was amazed when, like Mike said, we kind of started this in the conversation in February. We actually had production install running in July. And that was an moment for me to think, like, we actually have something really special here.
Yeah.
And it's not just a piece of software, it's a whole community that we're building, and they're contributing to this. And it's like, I couldn't have dreamed of a better collaboration or a better way that this has all flowed together. I'm super excited about where we are right now. And I'm having a hard time actually thinking where we're going to be in 3 months, because we've kind of done everything we planned on doing. I thought we would be here a year from now, and we're well past where I thought we would be even a year from now. So I'm very excited about where the future is and how we can help the community grow and help mail ops people get better quality of life, better tools to work
out of the basement.
And I'm super excited. I love our partnership. I think we work really well together, and I love the community that we're helping to build.
That's wonderful.
And even everything exceeded. Like, we went to Mog for the for the first time as KumoMTA. In last month in Brooklyn, and we had like 4 or 5 conversations lined up, and we thought, okay, that's pretty good. Maybe we can talk to a couple more people over there. We wound up talking to like 12, 13 different organizations. And half of those additional conversations were people telling other people, go talk to those guys. And that is not something we were expecting, that early out of the gate. I mean, it feels like if somebody said, hey, if anyone ever asked me for business advice, we'd be like, do not try to use this as an example. Because, you read your LinkedIn, find your ICP, work on it, do experiments. It's like, no, we knew our ICP was so down that every time I talk to someone and I say, look, imagine a high performance sending MTA, but it's open source. Everybody's just like, I'm in, right? That's it. I'm in. The only challenge we have is making sure people hear about it. And even that's actually been a lot easier than we were expecting. Because again, turns out word of mouth is way better than we would have thought for something like, and it doesn't hurt that we know absolutely everyone in the industry at this point almost. But like word of mouth was not something I was expecting so early on for people to say, hey, those guys, that was not part of the plan. And yet here we are. So that's been, like Tom said, I think that's the most amazing thing is like, we had no idea we were going to be here this quickly. Either I didn't think we built it that quickly in the first place, but it turns out Rust is perfect for this. And on top of that, we didn't expect, this much uptake.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I talked to the original people, it's true. They're like, I don't want another vendor relationship like this. And they don't, but they don't want to build their own. And so here we are.
So my parting thought is I really want to talk to you guys again in about a year. Like, this is such a great story. It's such a great conversation. I really appreciate you both, sharing it and kind of unfolding the thinking behind it. I don't think it's as accidental. I don't think the velocity you've got is as accidental as it may feel. I think that's another one of your cheat codes, Mike.
I told somebody this is a overnight success, 17 years in the making.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we should wrap. My guests have been Tom Mairs and Mike Hillyer of KumoMTA.com. Correct, Mike?
Correct.
Thanks again, gents. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Been great. Thank you.